This happened several years ago when my daughter was about 8 years old at the time. I was about 29, male. I woke up early in the morning, 1 or 2 a.m. At first, I really didn't think much of it. I sort of peacefully woke up, kind of just looked at the ceiling for a minute, and then turned my head toward the bedroom door, and I could see the nightlight in my daughter's room slowly, softly changing from one color to the next. It lit up the hallway. The phases from one color to the next last only a few seconds. Yellow, blue, green, and then red. I always thought the red was a bit dark, a blood red. I watched it go through the cycle a couple of times. It turns red one last time. I don't think much of it until it just doesn't change. It stays red. I think to myself, that's strange, but I just wait thinking that eventually it will change again. But it doesn't. At this point, enough time had passed that I'm like, oh no, what's going on? So I decided to go and check it out. But it was at that point that I realized that I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. In fact, it seemed like the more I struggled, the harder it was to move. The panic started to creep in, and with every second that passed, the more panicked I became. Then, my daughter let out the most horrible scream, the kind of scream that you never want to hear from your own child. It was horrifying, and I knew something was terribly wrong, but the more I tried to move, the harder it became. I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do, but all of a sudden it went silent. Still, I'm struggling to get out of bed. A few seconds went by when another blood-curdling scream. Suddenly, though, I was released and I sprang out of bed, only to faceplant on the ground, because my legs didn't work. I couldn't feel my legs at all. But I had to save my daughter, so I, butt sort of naked, started to low crawl to my daughter's room, ready to kill whatever was causing her harm. She let out one last scream as I approached the door to her room, and I mustered all the strength that I could to stand up and flip the lights on. I screamed, What's going on? Are you okay?" And she was in the corner of her room, curled up, the look of pure fright on her face. She immediately runs to me and jumps into my arms, because whatever it was, it scared the heck out of her, and that scared the heck out of me. Once she calmed down, she told me that apparently she woke up and was just laying there watching her light change colors. Then it changed to red and stopped. She started to get scared and was going to come to my room, but then her bedroom door apparently turned into a large mouth with sharp teeth and started coming toward her, chomping up and down. Just before I got to her, I turned the light on, and allegedly that's what saved her. But how is this possible? I mean, I have sleep paralysis the exact same time my daughter had a night terror, and they seemingly were connected? I don't know. That seems way too coincidental for me. Okay, so I know that this is a really weird one, but bear with me. I hope that you guys can give me some perspective or insights into what you guys think this might be. When I was growing up, my family lived in this huge, beautiful southern-style home, and I really loved it. I have very fond memories there. However, it was the most active home of all that I've lived in since. Very active. But only to my mother and I. You see, my two brothers and my dad, they never had any experiences. My mother had a couple. I was the only girl, though, and about 3 when we moved in, and I had a lot. At first, being so young, I didn't really think anything of the experiences. I didn't know any better. Later, though, I'd find out that they were not what other people see or interact with normally. But I'll tell you guys all the one that mostly stands out. One night, I woke up and I rolled over. I was barely awake and it was dark in the room. I didn't have a nightlight. But I noticed that there was some sort of a black thing lingering at the foot of my bed. I couldn't make it out right then, so I sat upright in my bed and tried to make it out, but I still couldn't really. so I got on my knees and leaned toward it. Now, remember, the whole room is dark, but I can clearly see that there's something there. It's not a figure, it's just sort of suspended in darkness. As I lean towards it, within like 2 feet I would guess, it looks a lot like a hand, but not a hand because it only has 3 fingers, bent slightly as if they were just sort of hanging there. It had no fingernails but pointy tips. It wasn't connected to any body either. I just sort of leaned back against my bed frame and watched it until eventually I just fell back asleep because it never moved. This happened a couple more times, but it seemed to be closer to me each time. Then one night, my cousin stayed over and she slept with me. I woke up and rolled over to face her, and it was right there in my face, hanging directly over her as she slept. It had never been that close before, and I was scared, but I could actually reach out and touch it, and a part of me wanted to. I reached my arm out and then just sort of pulled it back, and in the end, I never did touch it. I just sort of watched it until, again, I just fell asleep. But that was the last time that I saw it. Fast forward 10 years though, and I was helping my mum in the kitchen with supper. As we were talking, that old house came up somehow, and I finally told her what I saw, and she immediately stopped what she was doing. She asked me more. Then she took 2 pieces of paper out and asked me to draw it. While she was doing something on the other piece of paper, and when I finished, she finished. She asked that we swap papers, and we did, and she had, for all intents and purposes, drawn the exact same thing. We both just sort of looked at each other in amazement. She then told me that when she was little, she had went to a slumber party and all the girls slept on the living room floor in sleeping bags. She said that she woke up in the middle of the night and saw this claw thing hanging over the girl next to her. She reached out to touch it, and before she did, the girl screamed loudly. Everyone woke up and the girl was crying and saying someone had pinched her. My mum was accused of doing this, of course, but she swore that she never would have done such a thing. But this girl had clearly been pinched hard enough to even draw blood. I've done some research on this, and honestly, I haven't been able to come up with anything like this. So, what do you guys think? So, the first thing happened a few months ago. I couldn't find my house keys one evening, despite them always hanging on the hanger next to the front door. My husband, daughter, and I turned the house upside down looking for them, but there was nothing. My husband left me his door key and he went off to work the next morning. My daughter went to school and I went to work, arriving home about lunchtime. I let myself in the door and then went to hang my husband's keys on the hook next to the door, as is my habit. I literally jumped because my keys were on the hanger. The second thing only happened this past weekend. My daughter left her attic bedroom and went to stay at her dad's house on Sunday at about, I would say, 3 p.m. She went from there to school on the Monday morning, then got home to my house at about 4:30 p.m. Monday. She went straight to her room to get changed, but came flying back downstairs with a face like thunder. "You've been in my bedroom," she yelled. I told her calmly that I hadn't. I mentioned her having the attic bedroom as the steps are steep and I have arthritic knees, so I don't venture up there. So she believed me when I told her that I hadn't, but she went from furious to ashen-faced. "Why?" I asked. "Well, there's a lit candle on my desk." Just to mention a couple of things too, the candle was a small one, maybe like 5 centimeters tall, and not one that could be left burning for over 24 hours. There wasn't anything in her room that could have lit the candle as well, no matches, lighter, or anything. No one was home except for me the entire time, and I know that I didn't go up there. So I want to share something which happened nearly a year ago, just after the birth of my twin daughters. It's probably best to explain where we were. So me and my fiancée, we were staying in UHNM, Stoke Hospital Maternity Ward 206, gratefully before COVID really took a grasp on England, and I was thankfully allowed to stay with my family in hospital for the length of time that we were there. So because my daughters were premature, together with the fact that they were delivered by an emergency C-section, my girls and my partner had to stay in for a few days to ensure that they were putting on weight, etc., and ensuring that my partner was recovering well. Now, before their birth, my partner was admitted to hospital a couple of times before and was placed in a room of her own. I wasn't allowed to stay at this point, and while she was unpacking her bag, a little girl stood in her doorway. My partner saw her and said hi, with the little girl smiling and then running off. This seemed pretty normal until she realized that it was quite late, about 10 p.m, as she was admitted late in the day. However, she gave it the benefit of the doubt and didn't think too much of it. Fast forward to about 3 days after my girls were born, and we were just getting ready for bed, again around 8 p.m-ish. My partner, suddenly, who's pretty much bedbound at this point due to a pretty bad infection, says hi again. As I turn around, I see a little girl smile at our girls, then turn and run off again. Me and my partner both came to the decision that the girl must be staying with one of the other mothers in another room. I had my doubts in honesty, as I had been there 3 days and hadn't seen her once, but ignored it as a lot had happened and I probably didn't pay much attention. A couple of days later, we had to move rooms within the same ward, but in the midwife section, as my girls were discharged, but my partner had to remain in due to the infection. Oddly, it was the same room my partner had to stay in when she was admitted before she gave birth. And that same night we went into that room was very, very strange, as a few different things happened. First, my partner saw the little girl again. I didn't see her, but she told me that something just wasn't right, as the little girl was staring blankly at the window. Also, what was strange was that I didn't come across the girl at all as I came back from the kitchen area. Second, the privacy curtain that we had drawn kept moving like there was a strong draft, but only every now and again, not constant. Now, there was no window open, our room door was closed, and if you ever have visited that particular ward before, you know that there's no draft coming up from the corridor, like at all. Now, the most unexplainable thing which happened, though, that led me to posting this experience, started off when I went into the ensuite area to have a shower and brush my teeth before going to sleep. My partner had taken some medication which had put her to sleep. Please bear in mind, too, that because of the C-section, she had to lie flat on her back, and also due to the infection, she could barely move properly, and was not moving freely, to say the least. My partner does sleep talk, and whilst I was brushing my teeth, I heard her murmur, "Yes, nurse, if you're sure." Now, no nurse had come into that room at all, and even if they had managed to have snuck in, they would have walked past the bathroom door, which was open, so I could listen out for my girls, and I would have heard them speak, even if quietly anyway. So I ignored her and put it down to her sleep talking. I walked out of the bathroom, and the privacy curtain, which was closed, was now wide open. The room was bitterly cold, and my partner was now lying on her side, completely tucked in. First, hospital beds are not quiet. You hear every movement, and for my partner to be able to flip over onto her side would have made a lot of noise, together with the fact that she would have been groaning in pain just to move. That's ignoring the fact that she was tucked in as well. I immediately went over to her, woke her up and asked her how she managed to get into that position, and she replied, "The nurse did it," which I obviously stated that there was no nurse. She opened her eyes and snapped at me, the one with the hat. At that point, she fully woke up, and I think she realized what she said. It dawned on her exactly what she had seen and interacted with wasn't what a nurse of 2020 would be wearing. We were both pretty shook up, as it was completely surreal. We were there for a couple of nights longer, and I personally didn't experience anything else. However, my partner saw that little girl every night in the doorway for the whole time that we were there. I guess the biggest question is, has anyone else been to this ward or even the hospital and experienced anything similar at all? It's just always really stuck with me and made an already unforgettable experience all the more interesting. I've got no idea who that little girl could have been if it wasn't a girl staying with her mother, and she would have to have been there for at least 2 months if she was. I'd love to hear some of your opinions though, and if anything similar has happened to anyone else. In any case, thanks for listening. Romania is a country where people might get kidnapped, murdered, disappear, and so much more. My parents were legitimately afraid for me, and were initially against the idea. I had to lie to them that we would stay in a hotel near the Kozia National Park, so they would get off my back. Obviously, that's not what we did. But long story short, we had to travel from Bucharest to this park, which is around 200 kilometers in 2 hours by train. We got our immense backpacks, everything that we needed, and we went on our way. Nothing specifically happened in the train except for the fact that the train was overly crowded, with the exception of our train compartment being completely empty. This is extremely rare for Romanian trains, and I got excited thinking that we have that whole compartment to ourselves. As I said, it's a very rare thing to happen, and of course, after 10 or 20 minutes, it became occupied by a man entering our compartment, accompanied by a beautiful German Shepherd. I love all kinds of animals, cats and dogs in particular. I usually find my way around all animals, even those that don't like people, but not this dog. This dog was, I don't know, weird. He looked so round, as if he was sort of like a stuffed animal or something. But he would listen to his owners every single command. I was impressed by it, so obviously I started asking the man about his dog, since it would be a long and awkward trip to have to complete in silence. The man was exactly like his dog, and except for the commands that he would give to his dog, there was no other contribution to the conversation. He told me the dog's name is Ucigasul, which in Romanian means the killer. It's a very weird name to give a dog because, for this particular example, we would use the English word as it is, not translate to the word Romanian and name the dog like that. But I just thought, each to their own, right? I asked him why such a scary name though, and he bluntly replied, this dog is trained to kill. It's the only thing he likes and is good at. Now, I personally consider that dogs, they tend to grow up to have similar personalities to their owners, and most of the times, I would judge people with dogs on how that animal reacts to the world and to his owner. And let me tell you guys that these two did not have a good vibe in return. I brushed everything over, thinking to myself that maybe this guy is just training his dog to hunt in the woods or something. But then I started thinking, which woods are actually legal to hunt in our country? While I was thinking about that, the guy, out of nowhere, asks us if we're traveling to the Kozia National Park. That was surprisingly accurate, considering that the only time that we mentioned the place was in the train station long before we found out our seats, and way longer before we even met this guy. Again, I thought that it was nothing though, because in my country, people who happen to go in the same direction will try to make small talk and guess where you're heading. Of course, you can just lie to keep safe your destination, or be honest, I suppose. I took the honesty route, and I'm judging myself for that. My advice, never be too honest with strangers, or perhaps even honest at all, after you hear what I have to say. So, we confirmed that we were going to that place, asked what else to see around and stuff like that, since he started talking about the area, and, well, considering we knew nothing about the place, we took it all in. He told us about the woods, the vegetation, the animals that we can encounter there, told us about a beautiful monastery right at the bottom of the mountain that we could climb, advised us to visit the Low Tree Shore waterfall and explore the caves behind it, and to try out the local restaurant. When this guy started talking about the wilderness and nature, his eyes glowed as if he was experiencing some sort of a pleasant memory though. But he also grabbed his dog's collar from the neck, squeezing it tight. The collar made a sort of loud clink sound, and what surprised me was that the dog made no move, no whimper, no twitch, nothing. Just like a stuffed animal. Anyway, we reach our destination, say our goodbyes. The man waves at us and we face against him to go on our way. I turn around back right away because I wanted to ask where exactly that restaurant was, and the man and the dog were no longer there. But not just that, because his luggage was also gone. I'll admit that one creeped me out a bit, but who cares? We were just too thrilled for our first camping experience. We started walking with our backpacks on us, 10 kilos each, and reached a tunnel digging into the mountain. It looked amazing, exactly like those horror movie tunnels which, if travelled during the night, would make your hair stand straight. I guess lucky for me, we travelled during the daytime though, so that wasn't a problem. It wasn't a long tunnel by any means. We could see the end, but by the time that we got to the middle of it, we hear a whimper in the distance. It sounded like a dog crying in desperation for its life. So we stop. My boyfriend looks at me with this, "Oh no, you're not going to take that dog with us" sort of face, and tries to convince me to take a different route. We don't. I hear the dog and I go right towards the sound, and in the middle of the road I see a chubby puppy. It was crying really hard and laying on the cement looking really hurt. Maybe it had been hit by a car or something. But I sort of freeze and think to myself that our trip is almost over anyway, so I have to save this dog. We call for him. He looks at us, pointing ears up, gets up and, like a doofus, starts running desperately to us. He was alone and afraid, the poor thing, and so we called him Rudolph, and now he was our camping buddy. Like 1 kilometer further, we find another puppy though, maybe his sister, which we dragged from the nearby river. Someone must have deserted these puppies or something. She's all wet, cold, and hungry, and of course we take her too. So, here we are, 10-kilogram backpacks each, 2 puppies at my chest, boyfriend with map, trying to find a spot to camp for the first night. We passed by the monastery the man in the train mentioned, but because we had these puppies, we couldn't really enter the inside of the building. The priest wouldn't let us, so we just walked around the property, through the gardens until we reached the base of the mountain that we had to climb. I would also like to mention too that these puppies were tiny little brats, because the second that you put them down and forced them to walk on their own, they would slam their butts to the ground and just cry. And it was a real drama, let me tell you. But we walk and walk and walk until we decided to stop because it was getting late and I was beginning to get cold. We found a spot next to a small landmark type of cottage thing in the middle of the woods. We call it Troyanista. It's like a scouting post, but for the church, where they place religious icons or a Bible, stuff like that. Inside of it to bring good energy to the area, that is. It belongs to the church, and it wasn't like a house, I would guess, but basically just like a roof with 4 small walls and an opening. Not really a door, but you could go in it, hide from the rain and stuff like that. There was an icon inside and a Bible with pages ripped from it. And curious as I am, I opened the Bible, was really annoyed to see that people would write down their names in it, like couples do on trees. But on one particular page, the words, "I will find you," stuck out. It was written in red ink. Again, I thought to myself that it was probably someone who wanted to scare travelers with silly messages. So I put the book back and gave it no second thought. We put up the tent, make the fire, unpack, make food, and we eat. We feed the puppies, which now are cuddled up in our tent, and finally darkness starts to rise all around us. My boyfriend always keeps the fire up every hour because when it went off, it felt as if the sounds in the woods were louder and closer to us than in reality, and it got a little bit creepy. But it's around 12 in the morning. We're all in the tent, cuddling to keep warm. And then the puppies wake up and start crying. I get up and unzip the tent and put them out to pee. They do, and I get them back in. They cry some more, and the smallest one starts shivering. At that time, too, I hear grunting from behind our tent. At this point, my boyfriend is up too. He hears it as well. The fire is fading, and the moment that he unzips the tent and steps out, the sound disappears into the woods. Now, it did sound a bit like a snake slithering through the fallen leaves on the ground, but with unimaginable speed. So I ask him, was that a snake? And he says, up to this day, that he cannot explain what he saw. He says that it was a sort of slithery figure with feet that made a snort-like sound when the light hit it. The puppies calm back down after this creature runs into the woods. We try to go back to sleep after we reignite the fire. It's 3 a.m. this time when we wake up to the puppies being fussy again. The fire is nearly dead again. We clearly have no idea how to put up a sustaining fire, we think to ourselves. My boyfriend gets up to search for firewood, and I get out as well. I stare into the darkness, and I swear that I hear whispers coming from between the trees. I look up to the sky, consider that it's like 3 in the morning, and hear birds being very loud and fluttering their wings. Now, I'm no expert on birds by any means, but they usually sleep around this time, right? Well, these ones weren't. They were very active, very vocal, and seemed almost frustrated. I looked at the fire and followed the red sparks popping out of it into the sky, and become fascinated with something. The spark, it doesn't seem to die. It just goes on, and changing colour from like red to green, and then other colours. This was really out of the ordinary too, and it was odd for me because it created a sort of an illusion. Hard to explain, but it was something that was just weird about the night. It sort of looked as if the sparks were going into the woods, creating a track for me, maybe to follow. I kept looking after each spark to see when it would burn out, but none of them did. They would sort of just levitate, turn green, and then flow into the woods. At that moment, I begin to get goosebumps on my skin, obviously, because, I mean, how is this possible, right? The birds become more agitated, the mysterious light pointing us to go deeper into the woods, and all the trees around us seem to have eyes on them now, like I'm being watched. And as I inspect my surroundings, I hear movement in one of the bushes in front of our tent, like 10 meters away from us. Obviously, I stand my ground, but don't go near it. And suddenly, a dark, bent-over silhouette comes out of it, and half sort of inside the bush and half outside, just stares at us. I call my boyfriend, and we're both thinking, like, what the heck is that? Is it a bear cub? A wolf? A pig? The creature shakes its head the same way that a dog does after a bath, and I hear a distinguishing clink, like a dog collar. At this point, my boyfriend manages to light up the fire really well, which scares this animal to run back into the woods, through the bush from which it initially came out of. That calms us down, but definitely not enough for us to close our eyes during the night and go back to sleep. Going back into the tent though, and after a little while, my boyfriend does fall asleep, but I couldn't. The puppies are sound asleep, and I keep the zipper on the tent opened a little, just enough to have my eye peek through it, right at the earlier mentioned bush. Now, I think I must have spent at least a solid hour just staring at this bush, when all of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from that direction, and I immediately wake up my boyfriend, who is now peeking through the hole in complete darkness with me. And what we see next still haunts me to this day. So, from that exact same bush, we see a human head popping out and looking towards our tent. Note that our peeping hole was small enough to not make it look like you were being watched from the inside of the tent. And this head is slowly coming out of the bush. The skin was honestly so white too that we thought at first that maybe it was a ghost. After that, a shoulder, and then another one, a full torso, a leg, and bit by bit, an entire man emerges from the bush, completely naked, lit up by both the moon and our fire. And what he did next was terrifying. He comes so close to our tent and begins to remove branches, rocks, stuff like that from our fire, basically trying to extinguish it by dismantling it. This is all happening like 2 or 3 meters from our tent, mind you. I look at this man with horror because instantly I recognize him. And now the clink that I heard earlier from that animal is explained. It was the same man from the train, with his dog too. I don't know if he followed us, I don't know if he just went the same route as us and found us and decided to stalk us, but this guy was there since 12 AM at least. Because our fire would be dead every 2 or 3 hours and we would be woken up by the sound of branches being cracked, rocks being moved, which we internally explained as animals crossing the land. But it must have been him. After he successfully managed to put out the fire, he slowly crept back into the same bush, submerging into it bit by bit, until only his head would be out. He sort of stared at the tent as well with a really sort of disfigured looking mouth, looking like a moaning ghost almost. Obviously, we didn't go back to sleep after that. We didn't really know what to do, so in the end we just went back out, reignite the fire, light ourselves some torches and stayed near the campfire until the first rays of sun came up. I was too afraid to go near that bush obviously, and I did not need any answers or any explanations anymore. I just wanted daylight so that we could get the heck out of there, and as soon as that happened, we did. We packed our stuff and we got out of there as quickly as we could. We had planned a 4-day camping trip, but this was just too much, and so we gave up after that first night. It was a risk that we just did not intend to take, and whether or not that guy followed us or it was just a coincidence, it was enough to ruin everything. In conclusion to my story, and some advice to any first campers out there, please never tell your location or even areas remotely close to your destination to strangers. You just can never be too safe in this world with creeps around like that. Always be safe and always be aware of your surroundings and any changes that come to you under the form of sounds, movements, changes of temperature, and so on. Always protect yourself.